Hi, I'm Barb, Maple PhD, and as an astronomer, I see the universe in everything that I do, including board games. In this series, I am looking at the board game mechanisms as listed on Board Game Geek and seeing where they remind me of the universe and the way that we study it. This time, I'm looking at deck, bag, and pool building. Now, in deck building, players all start with an individual deck of cards, and then over the course of the game, they add new cards to this deck through some purchasing mechanisms. Similarly, pool building and bag building each player will start with their own individual pool of something. It might be chips of some sort, or it might be dice, and then they add to those over time, thus improving the actions that they can take. One game in my collection that uses this mechanism is Clank. This has got to be one of my favorite deck building games, where at the beginning of the game, everyone starts with the same really cruddy deck, and then they need to add to it with the goal of running through this dungeon and not getting killed by the dragon. Now, to do this, they're going to buy cards that have boots on them, which help them move. They're also going to buy swords to take out some of the monsters, and then have other special abilities that help them make it around the dungeon in different ways. And I love how, this game, you all start with the same thing, and by the end, everyone has a completely different strategy. Another game in my collection that uses this is Cubitos. In this case, it is a dice pool building game, where at the beginning of the game, everyone again has the same pool of cruddy dice that have one active side showing either a boot or a coin. It might be two active sides. And they're going to roll these and try and race around this track. But those coins are going to allow them to buy new dice that hopefully have more sides on them, but also give them special abilities that can help them move faster, give them those more boots, give them better buying power, or even get different rewards off of the board, or maybe move into the water, or just give them a little advantage during this race that they are doing with the other players. Now, in astronomy, deck building, pool building, bag building reminds me of stellar populations. Now, astronomers classify stars in many different ways, but one very common one is by the amount of heavier elements that they contain. And to an astronomer, heavier elements basically means anything heavier than helium. Stars are mostly made of hydrogen and helium. In fact, the entire universe is mostly made of hydrogen and helium. But as stars hold themselves up against gravitational collapse, they make heavier elements in their core. And eventually, the most massive ones will collapse in these supernova explosions, spewing out those newly made heavier elements out into the everywhere. Smaller stars like our sun, they're going to have a less spectacular ending, but no less beautiful. Their outer layers will puff out into their environments and float away to become available for other new stars to form. Once you've had one star that kind of goes through this cycle, the stuff that it spews out now has more heavier elements than that original star had. And new stars that form out of that stuff are going to have more percentage of heavier elements. And so by talking about the percentage of heavy elements, astronomers can kind of figure out how old the star is. What generation is the star? A star like our sun, it has a relatively high percentage of heavy elements at 1.4%, which I know doesn't sound like much, but the earlier generation, called population 2, has 10 to 100 times less than that. And then there is also a population 3 that astronomers talk about. These would be the very first stars that are almost entirely hydrogen and helium, basically made up of the stuff that happened after the Big Bang. We haven't observed those yet, so hopefully some of our upcoming telescopes will help us find them. But in a way, as you look at this, the population 3 stars have been traded up for population 2 as we get more and more heavier elements, and then trading up again for population 1. And so I really think it's cool to think about, and it's a little bit like, starting with your one deck of cards and then adding more and more cool things to it over time. So the next time you are playing a game that uses a pool building or deck building mechanism, take just a minute to think about how stars have traded up over time to create the elements that we need for the life we see around us. Thanks for joining me. I will continue my random walk through the board game mechanisms, so be sure to like and subscribe to my channel so you know when the next ones come out. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. I have a blog at MeeplePhD, and I will see you next time.